I'm like, call the midwives, call the doula. It was so surreal. I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, there really was a baby in there. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's been a while. It feels like it's been a lifetime since I last uploaded a video, but I had a baby. And I thought that today I would just say hello first of all and introduce you to her, and also share with you my birth story, which is the main purpose of today's video, is to share with you how everything all went down. For those of you who follow me on Instagram, you've definitely seen, many updates over the last 5 or 6 weeks or so. I have shared a bunch more over there. You already know I had the baby, but for those of you here on YouTube who don't follow me over there, this is the first time that I am chiming in and saying hello and introducing the little one. So this is Sadie Joy, and she is just about almost 5 weeks old now. There's so much that I could say about postpartum and being a new mom. It is a lot. It is very overwhelming, especially in those early weeks. I mean, I'm still in the early weeks right now, but it's a lot. It's intense. It is intense. It's a huge learning curve, but we are definitely figuring things out a lot more now, getting into a bit of a groove. So anyways, this is Sadie. Yes. So let me just plunk her back down in her little bouncer. Okay, chill there, just chill there. You're good. I shared on my Instagram that I ended up having a C-section. My birth went absolutely nothing like how I planned for, how I hoped for so many years, for as long as I can remember, longer than a decade for sure. I've always just kind of had this vision of the day that I would give birth, and giving birth unmedicated, having a very low intervention birth, having just this natural birth was a dream of mine for so many years, not just throughout my pregnancy, although it's something that I prepared for quite a lot throughout my pregnancy. And it did not go according to plan, it literally at all. It went the opposite of that. So grab a cup of tea, grab a coffee, grab some water, and let's chat. So before I get right into the very beginning of the story, there's just a couple things that I want to share about the weeks leading up to the birth, because there are some important things to note, kind of. So I went pretty overdue. I had her at 41 weeks and 5 days, so I was almost 42 weeks pregnant. Going overdue was not fun at all. That's a whole topic in and of itself. It is really hard going so overdue for a number of reasons. So there was that. But also, I just want to quickly share that the first kind of experience that I had with my birth plan, so to speak, getting flipped upside down a little bit, was actually a few weeks prior, when she was breech. She was frank breech at 37 weeks. And so she had actually been breech since at least 28 weeks or so. I had a couple of growth scans and she was breech since that point, although I had hoped that she would flip. But anyways, what happened was I got an ECV, which is an external cephalic version, which is a procedure done at the hospital where a doctor manually maneuvers the baby downward from the outside of your belly into a head down position. And I had that procedure done when I was 37 weeks and 2 days pregnant, in an effort to try to avoid a C-section, because a lot of times with breech babies, obviously not in every case, but a lot of times a C-section is kind of the route you end up going. It's what's recommended depending on your area, what providers are willing to assist breech deliveries. There's a lot of things here, and with my situation, it was looking like if she was going to be breech, that's what was going to be the most likely outcome. And I really wanted to avoid a C-section, big time. In fact, when I found out that she was still breech at 36 weeks. I had the ECV at 37 weeks, but I was distraught. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, absolutely distraught, and really, really, really wanted her to flip. And so thankfully the ECV was successful. If any of you out there, maybe you've never heard of this procedure before, or maybe you have, or maybe you were watching this and you're like, oh my gosh, I have one scheduled, or I'm thinking of getting one. I had a very easy experience. It was honestly, it took the doctor like less than a minute. It was super easy for her to flip her. Sadie responded really well to the ECV, and it was totally fine. No issues at all. She flipped, boom. I was like on cloud 9. I was feeling like, yes, she's head down. It was meant to be. Now I can move forward again with my kind of birth plan or preferences. So I was due at the end of October. I had been having on and off very mild contractions that kept coming on for honestly like a couple of weeks. It kind of became some prodromal labor for sure. It was really disheartening, especially approaching when she ended up being born. Like, once I was quite overdue, you know, through week 40 into week 41, like I was still having these contractions that initially would make me feel like, yay, something's gonna happen like any day now, but then they would just fizzle out, and it was so discouraging. Like, it really sucked, because eventually I was just like I don't even care. Like, these contractions mean nothing to me now, because they would happen throughout the day, they would stop, just nothing was happening. And at my midwife appointments as well, leading up to like my due date and that, her head was never quite as like engaged as maybe she like should have been. It was always in the back of my mind of like, is this baby going to come out easily? Like, I just kind of always felt like, oh, I had, I think, a cervical check as well at like week 40, and like wasn't dilated. Again, at week 41, still wasn't dilated, stuff like that. So anyway, all of these things tie into the story, kind of. So I had some really like brief casual discussions with my midwives about just generally going overdue. Like, before I even went overdue, this was like before her due date, they just kind of had asked me like, you know, what are your thoughts? How far do you feel comfortable going overdue? You know, going overdue isn't that abnormal. It's very, I know, oh my gosh. Due dates are just estimates. It's not, you know, it's not some concrete like thing. But still, I decided that my, I guess, limit with going overdue was going to be 41 weeks and 4 days. That's kind of what I felt comfortable with. I didn't want to go all the way to 42 weeks, just personal preference. I didn't feel totally comfortable with that. My midwives were like, if you want to, we're totally like fine if you want to go to 42 weeks. Beyond that, they would have to transfer care. But I made the personal decision that 41 weeks and 4 days would be like my limit. Again, thinking, I'm not going to go that far overdue though. I read a lot about statistics. I think it's 75% of first-time moms will have their baby by 41 weeks and 2 days. Like, you're generally pretty likely to have your baby not far past the 41st week. She's hungry. So I hit my due date. My due date came and went all through week 40. I hit week 41. 41 weeks in 1 day, 41 weeks in 2 days, 41 weeks in 3 days. And then it was 41 weeks and 4 days, and I had an induction scheduled that day. I had scheduled an induction for that day. And I really didn't want it to have to come to this, even though I felt by this point, like 41 weeks, 4 days, I felt pretty ready to like try to give my body a bit of a nudge with an induction. I was hoping that maybe I'll just need a little bit of something, and then, you know, everything will kick into gear and that's all I will need. But overall, I really didn't want to be induced, because I know that a lot of times with different interventions, it can kind of cause this cascade of more interventions, which leads, you know, one thing leads to another, which can happen often with birth, and, you know, ultimately did end up happening to me. We were expecting a call from the hospital at about 7:30 in the morning, and they told me to come in that night at about 8 p.m. So, you know, okay, so we go in at 8 p.m. and we didn't end up even seeing the OB until like 4 hours later. So by the time I saw the OB and she checked me, still wasn't dilated. I was still like a fingertip dilated, which is like half a centimeter. Baby was still not fully dropped, like still, her head was still high up. But anyways, it was after midnight, so it's now Tuesday, 41 weeks and 5 days that the induction began. So bearing in mind that at this point, you know, it's midnight, so we hadn't slept since the night prior. So they used a cervical gel, a prostaglandin gel, to ripen my cervix. And they had told me and my husband, like a lot of people don't necessarily notice very much right away. You know, maybe you'll notice some cramping, maybe not, but just go home and try to get some rest. And almost immediately after they applied this gel to my cervix, I began contracting like really strongly. And I was really caught off guard because it was like, oh my gosh, like very strong contractions. I had really bad back pain like right away, and just really strong contractions that came on every minute, lasting, you know, a minute or two, just very strong. And so they kind of monitored me for a couple hours. We walked around the halls of the hospital, but ultimately after a couple hours, they're like, you know, still just go home. This is normal. It's normal for the gel to do this or something. Even though I was like, I kind of feel like it seems like we should just stay at this point. Like I'm contracting pretty strongly and pretty like regularly, but they're like, no, just like go home and try to sleep. We go home. It's now, I think we left at like 3 o'clock in the morning. We go home, attempt to sleep. I think my husband like maybe fell asleep for like 5 minutes. I kind of tried to sleep, but I'm in quite a lot of pain from these contractions that are coming on pretty strong. And at about 4:30, I feel like a pop, like I hear a pop kind of inside of my body. And I'm lying there in bed, my husband's beside me, and I just wait a moment or two, because I'm thinking like, maybe that could have been my water breaking, but maybe not. And I just wait, and then sure enough, I just feel this like flood of water coming out of me. And I'm like, Sean, I think my water just broke. And he jumps up and he's like, are you sure? Like, oh my gosh. So I waddle down the hallway. Water is pouring out of me. Like it is pouring out of me. And I'm like sitting on the toilet. It's just like flooding out of me. Like, oh my gosh. And I was freaking out. I don't know why it scared me so much. I think I just wasn't expecting there to be so much water, or like obviously I knew your water breaking is like a normal thing, but maybe I don't know. For some people it trickles out, and for me it was just pouring out. And the thought that I was having was, oh no, like all my water's gonna come out and the baby's gonna have like no water to float in. I don't know why. That's what my concern was like all the water is going to come out. Anyways, so my husband's in the bathroom and I'm like absolutely freaking out. I'm like, call the midwives, call the doula. Like, we need to phone them immediately. And so he's like scrambling to find their like pager number, and he like phones the midwives, like lets them know what's happening, and they're like, okay, like go back to the hospital. The water was a little murky, so they were like, it's probably meconium. Chatted with the doula. Anyways, so we head back to the hospital, and it's, I don't know, 5 o'clock in the morning or so. They admitted us right away, and then there was meconium. There was in fact meconium in the water. And at about 7 o'clock in the morning was when we got moved to a birthing suite, which was a pretty nice room actually. It was a nice spacious room. There was a shower in there, and yeah, it was actually pretty nice. At about 10 a.m. is when the doula arrived. Hi. She was amazing. She was absolutely amazing. Like even like immediately when she showed up, it was just like, she was so helpful. She was the best ever. And I just was going with it. I feel like I was managing the contractions really well. I felt on top of it. And yeah, by this point, I still wanted to have an unmedicated birth. And I was just hoping that the gel was just going to be enough to kind of kick things off. And that's kind of what I was hoping. So I just, yeah, was laboring for a while. And then around 11 o'clock in the morning is when the midwife checked me, and I still had not dilated at all. And baby was still high. So I had made zero progress in the 9 or so hours that I had been laboring by this point, which was pretty like discouraging. I guess I thought something would have happened by then. You know, I was having some pretty strong contractions. And so yeah, that was a bit of a bummer. And it was that point that they kind of were like, let's start you on some Pitocin. And so I was like, okay, because the contractions were kind of starting to lessen a little bit as well. And yeah, so, you know, in my head, I was a little bit like, yeah, hoping that I wouldn't have to need Pitocin, hoping that all I was going to need was just a little bit of the gel or whatever. And then, so I get Pitocin, and even on Pitocin, I was hoping to still have no epidural, because that was kind of my original plan. Even though I knew Pitocin can make your contractions so much stronger and can make it a lot harder, I was still hopeful that I could do it. And I labored for a few hours on Pitocin, and for a while I was feeling like I was managing and I was doing okay. And eventually, after a few hours, it started to feel pretty unbearable. I just started, you know, to tell my team, my midwife, doula, my husband, like, I don't think I can do this anymore. I was at least hoping that they would check me and that I had progressed a bunch, because that would have at least been encouraging. But midwife checked me at about 2:30 p.m. and nothing. I was still like a centimeter dilated. Baby was still high. She still hadn't dropped. My body was contracting so hard by this point, like on the Pitocin, and my body was just working so hard trying to bring her down, trying to push baby down and descend, and I just wasn't dilating, like nothing was happening. This is when I requested an epidural. I mean, the anesthesiologist could not come fast enough, got it done, and the pain relief was amazing. And by that point, we were just gonna like let my body rest. It was so nice to be able to rest. By this point, I hadn't slept in close to 40 hours. I got checked a while later and had progressed to about a 2, and baby had dropped a little bit. And so we were like, yay, I made progress, like the tiniest bit of progress after, you know, so many hours of labor at this point. But unfortunately, what started to happen was baby's heart rate started to decelerate. And she was having these decels after I would contract, which signified that like she was just having a bit of a hard time recovering from the contraction. And it had been happening for an extended period of time. The midwife was monitoring this for about an hour and a half, and it wasn't getting any better. They had me changing positions. My doula had me in, both my midwife and my doula were helping me with various positions to potentially just try to, like maybe the baby needed to be shifted a little bit of a way to help her with her heart rate if the cord was getting pinched or something like that. So I was in all these different positions every few minutes, and nothing was helping her heart rate. And so the midwife came to my bedside and let me know that based on these heart decelerations, it doesn't look like baby is tolerating labor very well anymore. A cesarean is recommended. And I just remember at this point in time kind of mentally checking out. Like it's like I just had this like disconnect where I felt kind of numb to the whole situation. I don't think shock was necessarily the right, I mean, maybe a tiny bit. I think I just felt so like discouraged that I was experiencing like failure to progress. I was having a bit of a failed induction, even though it's like yes and no. Like my body clearly was responding to the induction. Like I was contracting, I was having really strong contractions. My uterus was working really hard to get that baby down, but it was kind of like, baby wasn't cooperating. And I just had this moment of like, here I am being presented with a C-section again, which I tried so hard to avoid a few weeks prior when baby was breech. We had the successful ECV, and it just was like it came full circle. And I didn't, in that moment, I didn't cry or anything. I just kind of lay there. My husband was amazing. He was asking tons of questions. He was like over by the computer monitor trying to understand her heart rate and like just asking all the questions. My doula was really helpful as well. And I kind of just, I think I was just trying to mentally process what was possibly going to happen. So they had to actually turn off the Pitocin, reduce it and turn it off because of baby's heart rate. The OB said, you know, if I wanted, they could try turning the Pitocin back on to see if baby would tolerate it a little bit better. And I think my husband and I just kind of looked at each other and we just sort of knew like this, like, I'm gonna have a C-section. Like I felt like even in the couple of weeks prior to this time with the, you know, the prodromal kind of labor I was having or the mild contractions that would fizzle out, I had this feeling in the back of my mind like, I just feel like I don't know, I just feel like I'm gonna end up with a C-section, like, or even if I make it to the induction, like something's just not gonna work out with this. That's how it felt when I was going so far overdue. It just felt like this baby was not coming out easily. Ultimately, yeah, I just was like, let's do the C-section. I cried and then I just was like, this is clearly what's meant to be. Like it's just the C-section situation is coming around full circle. So anyways, let me just continue on with the story and then I can share more of my thoughts on the actual, you know, how it all went down. Within about an hour, maybe less, I was wheeled into surgery. And again, I feel like I was so sleep deprived. Like by this point I hadn't slept in 40 hours that I don't know. I just don't even know that I was like fully mentally there. Like it just was so like everything started happening so fast. I just remember being kind of like on the table. There were tons of nurses and the doctor was there. So many people there, and I remember saying, I was like, I just want to say hello to everyone when I was like lying on the surgery table and they were like, hello. Anyway, it was weird because I just felt like this was like a big moment. They upped my epidural is what they did and I was so numb. The numbing went like up my chest even a little bit. And I just lay there. I think I started shaking and shivering, which I think is normal. And also I started to feel like I was gonna pass out. I remember saying to the anesthesiologist, like, I'm gonna pass out. And I think he gave me some more, like, I don't know, adrenaline or something like that like woke me up. It was kind of, I just felt like I was like on all the drugs and like sleep deprived and exhausted, like completely exhausted. Then they got started and you could just feels like I didn't feel any pain, but you could feel that they're like digging. Your insides feel like they're being dug out a little. And my husband was right beside me to my right. And then I hear the OB say, happy birthday. And then little Sadie started to cry and it was so surreal. I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, there really was a baby in there. Like, oh my gosh. And I just kind of cried out, it's a baby, I want to see my baby. And I just thought it was so crazy to hear her cry. Just to like hear that sound was like, it just makes you feel like there really was a baby. Like I actually made a baby. I do remember feeling very frustrated because again, I just was so numb. I was so like drugged up kind of. I was so exhausted, physically exhausted, that I felt like it was hard for me to take in the moment a little bit. And I remember like trying so hard to keep my eyes open to like look at her. And it just was hard, but yeah, so that was pretty much that. And then we were, you know, after everything was done in there. They wheeled us back to the birthing suite, and I was still pretty numb for a couple of hours after that, but I was able to breastfeed right away, and baby had, like, right from the start was amazing with latching. And even to this day, I've had thankfully, you know, I'm really, really grateful that I've had a very easy, straightforward breastfeeding experience. I've had no issues whatsoever, no concerns. She's been amazing with latching. My supply has been great. So that I've had no concerns about. So much of it is a blur. Those days following the birth and coming home and all of that is really such a blur. But that's basically the story. It went absolutely not at all what I was planning for when it comes to what I was hoping for my birth. The absolute opposite. I wanted a low intervention birth, and I feel like I had every possible intervention, to be completely honest. I feel like I had all the interventions, just about. And I don't know, like, I feel very, like, I've accepted that I had a C-section, and in fact, I actually feel very much like she was meant to come via cesarean. I think just the way that everything came full circle, like I've kind of talked about. For sure, I have, you know, there's things that I think about though with it. I think mostly it's not so much having a C-section that, like, frustrates me when I really, really reflect on the experience. It's more like a little bit of frustration with my body, like going so far overdue and feeling like things just weren't happening. I remember feeling mad at my body, like, what is going on here? There were people who were due around me having their babies, and it just seemed like everyone just goes into labor and it's just, here's the baby. You know, sure, there's another part of me too that thinks, oh, you know, I maybe just needed more time, but I mean, I was almost 42 weeks pregnant. It's not like I didn't give myself any time at all. It's easy sometimes to wonder, like, why did it have to happen this way? Or like, why did my body respond this way? Or why did the baby respond this way? Or just like, why did the whatever? But who knows why? Like, it's just how it happened. And it did turn out that she had the cord tightly wrapped around her neck when she was born, which is called a nuchal cord, and is often not, like, it's relatively common. It's not usually like a problem. Who knows if that, I mean, that probably had played a role in some of her heart decels. Maybe her head was on an angle. Like, she certainly wasn't engaged in my pelvis properly. Whether it was her positioning, I don't know. Like, I'll never know. There's no way for me to know exactly why she wasn't coming down and why I wasn't dilating. Like, I don't know. I don't have the answers, who knows? But all I know is that in some way she was meant to come by C-section. We call it the Sadie door. It's the Sadie door. It's just the door. She wanted to come out a different door. Birth is wild. It's a crazy experience. And I used to have so many, like, preconceived ideas about how birth should be, or how I want it to be, and how others should experience it. And now, having had a baby and gone through my own birthing experience, I have such a different perspective on it. Like, you really don't know the kind of decisions that you'll make or what a situation's going to be like until you're really in it and having to make certain decisions. I definitely don't look back on the experience and think it was this very negative experience. I wouldn't say it was like negative or positive. I feel kind of neutral on it, which is what both my husband and I have said. It was just intense. It was just a lot. It was just a big experience. But at the end of the day, little Sadie is here, and you know, the birth experience is really a very small part of now this enormous parenthood journey that we are on, and getting to know our little girl and raise her and watch her, you know, grow and change every day is just very special. So that's my story. Thank you for listening. I would love to hear, you know, if you guys want to share either a similar experience, or if you want to share a little bit of your birth story, whether you went overdue perhaps, or if you had a C-section, or maybe if you had a breech baby, to leave a comment below. I would love to hear from you. And that's it. I will just end things there. Thank you so much for watching and for listening, and I will see you all in the next one.